Well, I'm trying to understand things. I always try to understand, Chris. Help me understand this. A tweet from the great Matt Mayoko.
Yes.
In a major development at 49ers training camp, quarterback Trey Lance is, in bold here, not on the practice field. Sources says the team is considering all options with the number 3 overall pick of 2021 NFL Draft. QBs at practice are Brock Purdy, Sam Darnold, and Brandon Allen. We started the show talking about how Kyle Shanahan had said, I'll name that number 2 quarterback, and maybe it switches, but maybe around Pittsburgh. We also heard from multiple reports earlier in the day that the number 2 quarterback is Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
So if we've got QB1, we've got QB2, we logically thought Trey Lance is QB3. He's not at practice.
Yeah.
I don't want to read too much into it, but I think there's a lot to read into that.
I think there is too, yeah.
Has he been traded? Is he not happy? What is going on?
I wish I knew that before the last Factor Fantasy question. I'll tell you that. I was making this big thing about how Trey Lance, it might be next season, but for this season.
I really could have texted both of you that news, but.
Yeah. The odds of you
that's
reading
more
the text
Jason's fault. If
over me are higher, too. Like, Chris can sometimes send me a text and I respond to him 8 hours later, go, I saw that. And he's like, I sent that at 4 a.m.
If I want to be technical, like, it is kind of your fault, Jason, because, this is getting into more of a cultural talk, but you have an Android, and so I couldn't see the previews on the text, whereas if you had an iPhone, if you had an iMessage, it just would have popped up and I wouldn't have to click, x.com. I'm like, whoa, what is this link Chris is sending me?
He typed it out for me. He walked it in here.
Okay, see, that's not fair.
Okay.
That's not fair.
That's exactly what it reads.
Jason, again, this is really starting to smell like Chris is setting you up, and the fact that you're not seeing it is, I'm starting to see why. Exactly. I'm just saying. Jason wins twice.
I get the information first.
Connect the dots here.
Let's connect these dots. So I always thought if he was not QB2, that I didn't think there's any harm in keeping him as QB3. It's also not any harm in trading him. You could trade him if there's some form. I think you're trading him for less than what they probably could have at the peak.
Right.
He's not at his peak. What do you think's happening here?
Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah.
And I would say that this definitely, again, what's the thing that I keep saying about Trey Lance? He needs reps.
Yeah. He won't get him as QB3.
And he won't be getting him if he's missing practice. And I would assume, I assume they told him, hey, Trey, just so you know, we're making this announcement today. We assume we know how you feel about this, and, we're going to move forward with trying to find you a better situation. How about you, get your mind right and get ready to kind of pack your bags and get everything situated.
In the break,
how I'm reading it.
In the break, who did you say had some? Was it Minnesota that has expressed some interest?
So it is, Ian Rapoport of NFL Network and NFL.com has put out there already, almost immediately after tweeting out about Trey Lance, not missing out on practice. He says, as the 49ers weigh options for Trey Lance, calling his hometown team the Minnesota Vikings makes sense. Nothing is impossible, but Minnesota has a backup at Nick Mullins and drafted rookie QB Jaron Hall post-draft. These deals are harder and harder to make. So that is something that I had heard even at the start of training camp, that there was, the Viking. It was definitely more Vikings fans were starting to, hey, like, this is a local kid. Trey went to high school in Minnesota, and from what I understand, he wasn't like some big, like Jalen Suggs was like a 5-star quarterback and basketball player. He wasn't like the biggest name in Minnesota, but was still pretty well known in the area. So there's a little bit of, hey, like, let's bring this kid back home, get him comfortable. And if any situation's going to he's going to thrive in, it's in a situation where it's very similar to that of what he would be in San Francisco. He's not going to overtake Kirk Cousins as that QB1, but it is a more clear development plan of, okay, Kirk's contract's up at the end of this year. Trey, if you get comfortable in this season, and then maybe going into next season, we'll give you a legitimate chance on top of, we'll probably also bring some young quarterbacks in, maybe draft a quarterback in an early round, but you could see how that could be one of the better situations that he can walk into, obviously, with all the talent the Vikings have at receiver as well.
Also from Twitter or from X, whatever, David Lombardi, who covers this team, said, posed this question: can the 49ers cut Trey Lance Well, his fully guaranteed contract as a first-round pick means it would be $5.3 million more expensive against the cap to cut Lance than to keep him. So he doubts no there. But how about a trade? They could save the Niners $3.8 million in cap space for this specific year at a time when the team is operating with very limited room. So of the two, that seems more likely. He also could still be QB3, and I don't know if it's we're telling you all options behind closed door. I don't know. I mean, it could be an emotional thing. Right. I don't know what his camp and he himself thinks, but all we're doing is speculating here. But I think the fact is Darnold's been named number 2. Lance is not at practice today.
What do you think of the biggest pushback I've heard this entire training camp of, or even before that, all summer long, all offseason long, of why the Niners shouldn't trade Trey Lance before the season starts is because let's say Trey Lance is going to get moved. It's probably a 4th round pick at best.
Okay.
Isn't he more valuable as a 3rd quarterback option, a break in case of emergency option for the Niners than what that 4th round pick would get back in return? That's the one thing that I would say. I mean, that makes the most sense as to why you shouldn't just get rid of him for the sake of getting rid of him.
Yeah, I know where you're going. To me, logically, my first answer would be yes, but then I think I would stretch it out and say, the question you're asking, is he more valuable as a 3rd? To keep him as the 3rd QB over the 4th round pick, but I guess the difference would be, what's the difference of Brandon Allen being the 3rd QB versus what that 4th round pick would be? Because if that gap between Lance and Allen is marginal, kind of non-negotiable, whatever, it's like slim margin, then let's get something, I guess, would be the answer to me. But I also would say I wouldn't want to give up on him, but if everything goes right, Purdy's great.
Right.
Then when will Lance get the chance?
Right. And why would his value be any more next season? Like it'll just continue to reduce.
To me, the only chance that Trey Lance's value goes up is if what happened last year happened. So Purdy gets hurt, Darnold gets hurt, Lance gets thrown. He's like, wow, he does Purdy, and he plays 8 games and he plays pretty good. And then, but then is he your QB1?
Exactly.
So it's a scenario the Niners don't want to go through. Yeah. And that's why I think they now have 4 QBs in camp. But because I think you could still probably get more for him than Brandon Allen, let's say, and save, if that's true, $3.8 million of cap space. It's probably why they're exploring that, or could be exploring that option.
Yeah, and I still think that this is the best course of action. I still think trading him is the best for both parties. I think obviously for Trey Lance, a new situation is clearly something that he needs, a fresh set of eyes, a fresh start somewhere where, there'll still be some expectations on him, but I think for the most part, I mean, it definitely won't be as high as what it was here in San Francisco. And I think from the Niners side, like I've been saying this, if Brock Purdy has a rough 2 or 3 weeks, what's the first thing everyone's going to start saying is, should we consider bringing in Trey Lance like that?
But will they do that with Darnold or no?
I don't think so. Okay. I think everybody kind of know. Like, there's not going to be some, unless Purdy plays terribly.
Yeah, it's got to be noticeable. Yeah, like, we got to do something else.
Exactly. So I just think as long as Trey Lance is there, Trey just kind of has his legion of followers that are always going to clamor about, what about Trey Lance? Like, we're not getting good enough quarterback play. Lance is still on the roster. Why not try that? And I just think it's best to remove that distraction, if you will. I just think that the quarterback controversy really stops if Trey Lance isn't there. I don't think that we're going to be having season-long debates about, Sam Darnold or Brock Purdy, or Sam Darnold or Brandon Allen, which is the better option for them to go to. It's just not as fun of a conversation.
Yeah, it's really him. It's where he was drafted. He didn't ask for this, but you're right. The distraction part is, and I don't know that I don't know this at all. If internally, I don't think he's creating a stir, but you're right.
It's just media.
If Trey Lance just wasn't even on this team and they decided today, like, there was a 4th quarterback, but Brandon Allen's QB3, it's like, all right, that's just the order. Yeah. And I don't think we're talking about Brandon Allen, worrying about Brandon Allen, unless you need to because of other injuries. But Trey Lance will still be on the minds if he stays in that org. It'll still be a topic of conversation if he's still in the organization.
Right. I mean, and I think it's completely different scenarios, but like I always use Tim Tebow as the example of just like, he could have stuck around in the league and been a backup for a couple more years. But I think the media distraction was just so much that every team was like, I'm not going to deal with that for a backup quarterback. A backup quarterback should be one of the last things I'm thinking about. I'm a lot more focused on the starter. And if it is just media, but if I have to spend time answering questions about the play of my backup quarterback, that's just not what football coaches want to do. They think that that's stupid. That's for the birds. What I want to talk about the people who are actually playing football. And I think, there is definitely an element of that. As we know, Kyle Shanahan is not one who loves addressing the media. And I think this entire quarterback conversation has been pretty exhausting for him.
Yeah. Well, this story is, as it develops, we got more. We're going to have more on this. The latest from the 49ers. We know Brock Purdy is clearly the number one. It was announced today that it looks like Sam Darnold is the number two. So what happens to Trey Lance? He's not at practice today. We'll try to read between those lines. We'll have more on that when we continue here with Whitey and Watkins on Sactown Sports.